So I'm going to talk about everything else. So everything has post, as you all know. Essentially every movie, every TV comedy or drama, essentially every commercial, every download or educational video, they all have post. So what is everything else? Everything else is, to me, what's live. And Michael said, what happens simultaneously is not post. And live is simultaneous. So what is live? Well, there's a not mass audience version of live. There's military, medical, and industrial uses. Nice chairs that the drone pilots have, by the way. And then there are events like press conferences, and sometimes they have bulletproof sets. I've managed to work with the Secret Service on that. We wanted to use one of our own sets. Secret Service said, well, it has to be bulletproof. I said, can you bulletproof it? They said, sure, no problem. By the way, that thing behind Bush, that's not a halo, that's a radome. This I usually talk about tomorrow every year, the press bridge, which at events the press shows up, and back in the good old analog NTSC days we could feed them very easily. In the HD days, not so easily. Some of the requests I've had, well, no, I can't use mic level or normal line level, I need minus 20. I know it's an NTSC show, but can I get 50 hertz? How about 25p? Can I get YUV? Can I get a split screen? And can I get German subtitles? And we try to accommodate them. Here are two headlines from yesterday. This is both of them appeared on TV Week. Better Call Saul sets ratings history, biggest series premiere in cable history. And then the Grammys, who watches the Grammys? The ratings were down 11% from last year. So let's compare those two audiences. 6.9 million viewers for the biggest premiere in cable history, 25.3 million viewers for the thing that the ratings went down. Here's another mass event. This is a funeral. Who watches funerals? This was the funeral of Princess Di. The estimated live TV audience was 2.5 billion with a B. There's lots of other stuff, of course. News tends to have live aspects, not all of it. Weather, spectator events, award shows, that's the Academy Awards down at the bottom left, ballets, concerts, opera, parades, theater, and of course sports. And then there's this new funny thing happening in cinemas. Some people are saying, well, cinema's dead, no one's going to that. The theatrical box office goes down all the time. Well, here's a report from an Irish publication back in November about what's called event cinema, or live transmissions to cinemas. And they said that the 2013 box office was double what it was in 2012, and 2014 was already running high enough that it looked like it might double again. I work on one of those live cinema shows, the Metropolitan Opera Live in HD, which is the premier alternative content for cinema worldwide. We are on all 7 continents, including Antarctica, and in ships at sea. And we do encores, and our encores do not get nearly the audience that the live ones get. Here is a story about the Super Bowl. Drew a record U.S. television audience. Here is another story about the Super Bowl drawing a record U.S. television audience. That one's from 2011. One of the stories about the audience for this year's Super Bowl, which was a total audience, I'm not sure quite what that means, of about 165 million. And that was just in the United States, and it was 19 million in Canada, and there were other countries. But according to total audience, the last 24 Super Bowls were the last 24 shows that had the highest audience on television. So here's difference in workflows. There's acquisition, and Michael said we don't need to have any standards in acquisition, but I wish you luck connecting a non-standard lens to a non-standard camera. Then we have storage, and if it's something that's going to have post, we have stuff like check the gate and see if there was any hair in the gate. And you can use a file, but files must be closed before you can do anything with them. And then post, and then distribution. At the bottom is the live workflow. It's the acquisition and processing simultaneously, so I guess that means not post, and then you go to distribution. Now, you do frequently record stuff that's being done live, but the storage requirements are different because there are no do-overs, so you can't check the gate. And sometimes you can't wait for the file to be closed. For example, for confidence playback, you can't play back a file that hasn't been closed. You can make every frame its own file, but that gets a little complicated in post. So everything versus everything else. Well, there's no post. Duh. So that means we have to do color grading live, and this happens to be the color grading section at the Metropolitan Opera. The two guys on the left are grading up to 16 cameras live as scenes are changing wildly with different color temperatures, different brightnesses, and so on. The guy on the right has been taking notes during the rehearsals and is calling them back and saying, okay, at shot number 2463, you need to go to scene file 64 because it's going to be hugely bright. There's live editing, there's live mastering and live versioning. So the image on the left is the control room, the guy at the right is cutting, so he's doing editing. The image at the top right is two different versions for 50 hertz and 59.94 hertz countries. Actually, we do different sponsorships for different countries, so we have even more versions than that. And then there are some of the subtitles that we're sending out in different languages. There are many cameras live. Why do we need many cameras? Because we can't take one camera and move it around. Or if it's a sporting event, we can't take that one camera and put it on the field with the players. Or if it's an opera, we can't take that one camera and put it on the stage with the opera singers. So 45 cameras at the recent Super Bowl. And we also have long lenses. Now, why do we have long lenses? Because if you look at the field, you can't have the cameras close to the players. They have to be far away. So if you want a close-up of the ball, you have to have a long lens on the camera. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, there are no long lenses for PL mount cameras. Larry is going to talk on Thursday about the longest lens that anyone has come up with yet, which is a 20-to-1, but we typically shoot with 100-to-1 lenses at the Met or at these award shows or at sporting events. Here is a story that appeared in The Scotsman about an opera. This was a particular opera that we happened to have 16 cameras on, and they said the cameras were undetectable to those actually watching in the opera house because we had them on the sides with their long lenses. But there are problems with that. It's an issue for 4K because getting the appropriate MTF of 4K is difficult for a long lens. It's difficult for the PL mount. Again, there'll be more about that on Thursday, but do go check out Hitachi in the demo area. They have an interesting solution to this. And do check out Fraunhofer on Friday. They'll have some interesting things to say about this. Well, one of the things that can be done is to calculate virtual space. And this is a European Union project that I worked on called Project Fine. And here's an image. Now, there may be some jerkiness in the motion. That was just the way that I captured it. So I recommend that you go to Vimeo and look it up. And you don't have to write down this number. I'll give you a much easier URL at the end. So at the left are the 6 camera positions that they were using to calculate the 3D space. They were all basically in the same area of the stadium, but now the camera can fly around. When I first saw this, it was taking approximately 10 seconds of processing per frame. It is now real time. And so this is something of excitement to those of us in the live area because we can position a camera on the field or on the stage. It just happens to be a virtual camera instead of a real camera. And we don't have to worry about the lenses either. All of these cameras had fixed lenses. They're basically machine vision cameras. Now, this is just all the working out stuff, but in a moment you'll see some actual live work on it. There we go. So this is on a game that they were testing it live. And resolution is still a bit of an issue, but motion is not. So again, any jerkiness you're seeing in the motion, that was my problem with the way that I captured it. And people disappearing, that's still an issue that needs to be dealt with. But you can actually look at stuff that you can't see from the cameras, because it can calculate what the players look like as they turn around on the field, and remember that. Okay, some more differences. Low latency. If we're encoding, we can't do multipass encoding. Multipass encoding is wonderful, but it's basically quality, latency, or bit rate, pick any two. For transmission, if we want to have a conversation, if someone's being interviewed, that becomes an issue. We can't use satellite transmission. If we go multiple hops, then that's too much of a conversational delay. And for processing, we have no way of compensating if we have high latency. So let me show you some of the types of latencies that may be introduced. Again, coding, satellite paths, frame rate conversion, anywhere from 1/10 to 4/10 of a second, typically, depending on what the input and the output are. Frame synchronization, which will vary depending on how far out of sync you are. Effects processing might take only a field, but if you're doing lots and lots of effects, that builds up. And then displays. Every year for opening night at the opera, we send it to as many screens in Times Square as we possibly can, and we've gone as high as 18 screens, and each of them has a different latency. And so because we're providing audio, we have to synchronize everybody to the latest screen. And then they say, oh, but we want to do an interview with somebody in Times Square. Virtual graphics, if you've ever seen a football game, then you've seen this kind of thing, the 1st and 10 system, and it looks like it's been painted on the grass, but it's actually just virtual graphics that were developed for live. Then we have this concept of remoting the remote, and I think the first person to use that phrase was George Hoover of NEP. At the recent Live TV LA event in November, one of the people was talking about doing sports, and he said that doing something in Vancouver and flying the technicians up from Los Angeles cost about $10,000 per technician above and beyond their salaries for that one sporting event. So it would be great if you could have as many people as possible not have to move. So can we have the switcher remoted? Can we have the graphics remoted? Can we have the camera control remoted? For the US Open, Sony has a division called Hawkeye. They've developed this system, again, using 3D virtual space, originally to calculate out-of-bounds calls, but they can also use it for auto-tracking and selecting of shots, so maybe we can get rid of the director. This is virtual lighting. We provide virtual exit lighting for the operas that we do, because the projectionist in the multiplex doesn't know when the opera's over and the people need to get out. So we send 10 minutes of this screen, and there's enough light reflected off the screen to provide exit lighting for the people. Some unintended consequences. The virtual print fee, great way to get digital cinema projectors into theaters. And there was a story recently last week about something like 90% of the world's cinemas have converted to digital cinema projectors, but they don't necessarily use them. And the reason they don't necessarily use them is because of that virtual print fee. So if the Met comes in with an opera, they can either pay a VPF and use the digital cinema projector, or they can use another projector like the one that they use for the pre-movie advertising. And so the middle was something that someone sent in from a movie theater saying, hey, it's supposed to look like the top, and what I saw was what's on the bottom. There are also issues of sound, as you can see on the right. How about live stuff at the event itself? This was another version of the Project Fine. I did not work on this part of it, but you can be at the event, have your tablet, and select what you want to get blow-ups of and what you want to find out about what's going on the field, who the players are, what the formation is, and so on. That will be called number 2 when I give you the URLs. Here is on-site at an opera live event, and the guy in the middle there is Eric Einhorn. He's the general manager of on-site opera, and they did a performance of Pigmalion, an 18th century opera, and they used Google Glass in the audience for people to see the subtitles as the performers were moving up and down the aisle, so you could turn your head and still see the subtitles of what they were singing. Too bad Google didn't think Google Glass was such a good idea. Here is an off-screen picture from my TV set during the trailer of Mozart in the Jungle, and it says, "Ooh, I got an internet connection error." And so here it is blown up. "We're unable to connect to Amazon Instant Video. Select OK, then try again in a few minutes." Okay, no problem for Mozart in the Jungle. We'll go out, we'll eat something, we'll do the dishes, come back. But not necessarily good for live events. Here is Michael Butler's interception to not change the score at 20 seconds before the end of the game. And if you come back in a few minutes, well, the game is over and it didn't go the way everyone expected. There was actually an example of this in 1968, known as the Heidi Game. November 17th, Heidi was scheduled to begin at 7. In those days, football games were supposed to take 2 hours. This one was running close to an hour over. There was 1 minute and 1 second left on the game clock. The Jets were ahead 32-29, and so the network started Heidi. And then, amazing, the Raiders scored 2 touchdowns in that 1 minute and 1 second. And so NBC cut away from Heidi and went back to the game with people saying, "Oh my God, did you see that? That was just the most amazing thing." And therefore, all of the viewers, both the game viewers and the Heidi viewers, were unhappy. So, live means not being able to say, "I'm sorry." And I will be happy to take any questions. And those 2 videos that I showed, here are the URLs, bit.ly, that's bit.ly/mark-pf1 for Project Find 1 and pf2 for Project Find 2. Any questions? Pat.
Hi, Mark. Fascinating as always. So, it's an interesting question that's come up recently with regard to live, is where is artistic intent rendered? Some say it's in the living room. Certainly those of us from the creative community would think it's more in the post room or in the color suite. But for live, what's your opinion? Where is artistic intent rendered?
My personal opinion is it's the television director. But since I do operas, I have to tell you that there are discussions on opera conference rooms where people say it shouldn't be the television director, it should be the opera director. And so we get into an issue of that. Have we gone away from the opera director's intent simply by putting it on television? But as for doing it at the home, Norm Hurst, who...
Can I quote you on that?
Absolutely. Make sure you spell it right. Norm Hurst bought himself a 4K Sony TV, and he sent me a picture of the carton, and in one of my lectures I showed the picture of the carton. Right on the carton, right next to Sony, and in gigantic letters, it says, "Upscale everything you watch." Any other questions? While you think of a question, I'll just tell you that getting here on Sunday, the weather was a big mess, and so I was supposed to fly to San Francisco first, and there were headwinds, so we had to stop in Las Vegas to refuel. Got to San Francisco, had to wait for the plane to be able to land. It landed. We got on the plane. We were buffeted tremendously by turbulence, and that's before we left the gate. And then we left the gate, and we got to the runway, and we're about to take off, and the pilot says, "Uh-oh, there's something wrong with the plane. We don't think it's going to take a long time to fix, but I'm sorry, we just can't take off until we fix it." Okay? So we wait a few minutes, and the pilot gets back on. He says, okay, we're ready to go. I just want to tell you these new planes are very complex, and what we had to do was hit Control, Alt, Delete. I am not making this up. Question over there. Stan.
Great presentation as always, Mark. Anyway, the question for you on the opera side, you look at all these multi-cam things, people bringing up their iPads and looking at things. Are you looking at allowing people on an interactive opera thing where they can actually look at the thing that they want, etc.?
It's not a question that I should answer. It's up to the general manager of the Opera House, but I will point out that Houston Grand Opera and San Francisco Opera both have something they call Opera Vision, and they have plasma screens with close-ups that they do live during the operas. Deborah.
Sorry I don't know this, but are you guys working on 4K at the Met?
We are not, to the best of my knowledge, looking at 4K at all. We have had some discussions with NHK about 8K, and the 8K would be a single camera in a sweet spot, no directing, no editing, proscenium wide, projected on a screen exactly as wide as the stage at the Met, and people bring their own opera glasses to see what they want to see. But by my calculations, that's really not enough resolution for doing it, which may be why we haven't done it. Any other questions?
Same thing of high dynamic range.
Are we interested in high dynamic range? Yes, very much. We're also interested in higher frame rate. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.